use this book to open old wound. This was 2016, 8 years ago. Here you get. So Babalola is like, you Dele, how dare you? You have been after me all this while. You have been the one that exposed the fraud. You are the one who we did everything to, and I didn't make any money from this. Now all these younger people are going to know that I am a fraud. I'm a very corrupt old man. But I didn't make money. I was cheated too. So if I say the money way a little and the rest no give Babalola. That is why they want to collect the money Dele Farotimi make the royalty from this book. They are asking for 500. Come on. Interesting, right? This is interesting. No joke. But let's continue because we still have like about a few other pages to go. Okay. Anyway, when I saw Sobio Ashimi's name amongst the past parties stood by Babalola, I laughed with unrestrained mirth. I had met him in Agbenla's office at the peak of the Eletus problem. He attended a meeting in Agbenla's office, and we were also there after I had obtained the composite survey report, and apparently, in coordination with Pedro, who had by then become the undisclosed attorney for the Eletus, and was fully aware of everything, Agbenla was seeking to give official cover to the Eletus attempt to doctor the survey and to provide additional information to explain away the inconsistencies and fraud. Ashimi came with an explanation that was not only fraudulent, it was also disingenuous. He had some cock and bull story about a shifting local originating point for the survey. And using a survey report I had commissioned the Unilag Survey Department to prepare, we demolished the spurious arguments he was raising. But I needed not to have worried. My clients were not the intended consumers of the fraud being concocted. That part of the scheme is the emerging fraud on the state and the expected solution to the many problems birthed for the conspirators. When Afe found that he had been schemed out of the game and that Pedro was reaping from his exertions, he was enraged and sought to understand what had happened and why the fact that he had gotten the Supreme Court to do the impossible was not enough to make the Lagos crew deliver the execution of the revamped judgment. When Amina Ogi, GSC, railed against that woman that I played a video here yesterday, was it yesterday? It was yesterday or 2 days ago. Yeah, that woman, she's mentioned in this book. When Amina Ogi, GSC, railed against Babalola's professional conduct or misconduct in the Bayelsa case, he did so either as an ostrich or out of ignorance. Ape has been corrupting the Supreme Court from ages past, and he has led it to commit the most egregious act of evil and wanton injustice. Ape knows what our ladyship does not know or pretend not to know, that justice does not live in the Nigerian court. And you can get the court to do whatever you want, as long as you know who to speak with and who to pay. Our first letter to Ayotunde Phillips, then Chief Justice of Lagos State, showed how frustrated he had become about the inability to execute the fraudulent judgment, in spite of the fact that he had the Supreme Court to do what it had never done before, and exactly what Amina Ogi GSA presumed to rail against. Pedro, SB Joseph, and the Eletus formed a new confederacy and had neither room nor use for Afe Babalola, who had overestimated his own importance to the plot and failed to discern that he had effectively become unnecessary to the new plotters. I am convinced that Pedro muscled in on the plot and was not a part of the original plot. His de facto headship of the state's committee charged with finding a resolution was the critical factor in his emergence. In going through processes filed by Afe Babalola, I came across a letter he had written to the then Chief Justice of Lagos State, Ayo Phillips, where he had violently libeled me and described me in extremely disparaging terms. Afe is so enmeshed in his corruption that he has lost all sense of propriety and or fairness. I will let you decide the fairness of the doyen of Nigeria injustice and lawlessness in describing the younger council, who had only sought the cause of justice from the well of justice into which the old man had always pissed. I immediately caused counsel in my office to write a letter to the old man and made clear that I was not going to be satisfied with anything short of an apology and a retraction. I have absolutely no interest in taking Babalola corrupt money, but I was not going to allow a corrupt, amoral man, devoid of any integrity, to define me for posterity when none of us would be around to dispute the hagiographic account of the event. The doyen of Nigerian illegalities ignored to offer any acknowledgement of the letter and arrogantly refused to retract nor apologize. I caused writs to be issued against Babalola's son for libel. I told everyone that cared to listen, including my trusted partner and friend, Raf Nwoke, that the case would never be allowed to proceed to trial and that it would be killed within the system. Afe simply had no leg to stand on and would not dare to join issues with me in court. I spoke with the finality of divinity, but I did so only because I know my country and the extent of the wrath that my suit against Afe was threatening to expose. I was bang on the money. Babalola was imperiled by the suit I filed in court. It was designed to blow open the tawdry details of his dirty deals with the Supreme Court. But the suit also represented a threat to the Lagos part of the conspiracy. It was one thing to be having a quarrel amongst thieves. Each knew how far they might push their claim, but it is quite another thing to get into a rofo fight with a man seemingly incapable of walking away from a fight. The Dele conspirators found a semblance of peace when I filed the suit against Afe. The perils that were being faced by all key members of the twin camps of conspirators preoccupied their minds, and thanks to the verbiage that had been released by the camps for public consumption before I entered the picture with my libel suit against Afe, it is possible to piece together key fragments of what took place. I must close with a caveat. I am not privy to what happened in the conclaves of crooks, but I do remember that I have heard it said, if it waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is most likely a duck, or similar words to that effect. In the early days of Eletu saga, I was often heard making an equivocal declaration that I would burn my wig and gown in protest and on the steps of the Supreme Court if Eletu judgment was ever enforced. I am happy to have been spared the nuisance of making a spectacle of myself. In order to draw attention to the madness of the court, I knew exactly what message I was passing when I repeated that statement in front of the likes of Lawal Pedro, who I knew had repackaged himself as the Eletu's lawyer. He had, to my knowledge, had the brief of defendants through his remedium chambers, whilst involved in their prosecution by the states, and he had acted as counsel to parties suing the state when it was his duty to defend the state. I was making it clear to all that I was happy to die in defense of what I knew to be true. Pedro exploited that resolve to further neutralize Afe's influence over the Eletus and thereby strengthened his own importance to the conspiracy if they were to get anything of substance from the puerile judgment and their Pyrrhic judicial victory. This resolve became a key factor in the negotiation that have ensured the cessation of hostilities among the competing interests in the conspiracy too. When the conspiracy was reconstituted, Pedro was exactly where he wanted to be. He became the deal maker. The Eletus took whatever they could get off the victims with Pedro, the constant broker, and Pedro began to help them to package a deal reminiscent of the one that the government had done with the Oluwa chieftaincy family after they had won the court judgment in the Ijora axis of the state. The deal structured by Lawal Pedro extracted money from the corporate players in the neighborhood, but considerably less than the Eletus had been originally offered by the panicked parties. The sweetener in Pedro's deal was the peace and calm it brought to the traumatized business entities. The Eletus, having been stymied after the initial bombast of the early days, became more reasonable under Lawal's influence, and it made them see further reason for accepting the settlement by influencing the state to offer the Eletus land to be reclaimed from the lagoon bed. Land to be reclaimed from the lagoon bed is important in the resolution of the squabble within the Confederacy. The expected reward for the sickening injustice laid in the Eletus paying up on the agreement that they had signed with Afe Babalola to pay $10 million. The Eletus had no money for anyone at the time. Afe was signing them on. And the assumption was always that the corporate players expected to be caught up in the trap would be the ones to be squeezed into coughing up the monies. I am not privy to what was paid by anyone, but the Eletus began to flash the cash. Rolls-Royce cars began to compete for parking space in the Oval that was home, and the younger ones began to live the high life. Our first findings revealed Lawal's role, and Afe dragged Lawal into the fight. This fight ended with my suit. In one of the interviews granted by Pedro at the peak of his dog, did you hear about Eletu families? People who sold land and they are living large. Some of them are the ones who are now asking the Igbos to go back to Anambra. After they have sold all the lands, some of them they fraudulently acquired their family lands, their ancestors' lands. They bought themselves, they built themselves mansions. They married many wives. They were buying themselves Rolls Royce, expensive automobiles. They were living large as billionaires. Now that they barely have any land to sell anymore. Some of their Runukus, they are now asking those people who bought the land, who built the entire place up. They are looking for a time that maybe there's going to be a civil war, so they can chase all of them away. Igbos, go back to Anambra. You want to control our Lagos, go back to where you come from. Meanwhile, they sold all their family land, family houses, everything, just to flex, to marry wives. Today, they are now saying that the Igbos are trying to take over Lagos. Remember that? Oh? The Eletus are very poor. They were very poor. It was Afe Babalola's fraud that turned them into billionaires. I don't know if they still have the money. If you go and see some of their families right now, they are wretched, except for those who directly benefited from that money. Billions and billions. All right? They are wretched now. So many of them. Omonile Leko. They got all the money, spend the money, bought themselves all the fancy stuff, And now that they have barely nothing to sell, they are now campaigning for everybody to go back to where you come from. Leave our Lagos alone. Even if you leave Lagos for them, right? They will still resell the whole place again and use the money to marry wives and live large. Bunch of useless people. Anyway, let's continue, right? In one of the interviews granted by Pedro at the peak of his dog fight with Afe, he let it be known that he had gone to Ado-Ekiti to see the old Koja, that he had explained himself to the old man, and that the man had come to see that he had not done anything to steal or influence the Eletus. Nothing could be further from the truth. Afe was offered 2 incentives for the settlement of his problems with Pedro, and I am aware of both, even as I must concede that I do not know the details. Afe was offered part of the land that had been packaged for the Eletus by the Lagos State conspirators. Pedro said as much in one of his press comments where he made the announcement of ongoing reconciliation efforts between the parties. I am not aware of the details of what Afe was offered, but I am convinced that the Afe part of the Confederacy was settled with the promise of a portion of the land. But there was a second incentive. This was the promise to get rid of the nuisance that my libel suit against Afe represented. I knew when I was filing the suit that Afe was not in a position to ever defend the suit. He has no defense, and he never anticipated that I would ever become aware of his libel. And if he did, he wasn't concerned about what a mere mortal like me could do to a god like him. Afe was offered assurances that he needn't worry about the case. The Lagos conspirators had it in hand and would extinguish the fire. Recall what I had told you of Lagos society. Everybody knows everybody. Lagos power elite is highly insentious. It is a closed group. There are cycles within the several cycles, and it takes the initiate to discern that there are neither religious nor political divides amongst the Lagos ruling class. Pedro had spent a lifetime in the Lagos judiciary. He rose to head the Justice Ministry as the SG. He was a good son of the system and would probably have made Attorney General if he had been considered useful when Ambode emerged. He knew he would deliver on his word to Afe, assuming that he hadn't concluded before going to Ado-Ekiti for the peace meeting with Afe. By the time I was filing my suit on the 19th September 2016, Pedro had been removed from office as the SG, Solicitor General, that's the SG. He had made strenuous effort to be promoted upward and made the Attorney General at the dawn of the Ambode era. But Pedro had no immediate value to the powers that be in Lagos at the point in time. He was stopped to pasture to the raucous joy amongst lawyers and staff of the Lagos State Ministry of Justice, where he was almost universally derided for his avarice and legendary parsimony. I first became aware of his problems with Afe from tales borne to me by staff of the state judiciary. The assignment of the case took forever at the court registry, and when it was eventually assigned, it was to the court of Oyekon Abdullahi, my former oga, chairwoman at my wedding reception, sworn enemy of over a decade, and newly transferred to the Lagos division of the court from the Ikeja division. I saw her transfer from Ikeja to Lagos at the material point in time as a tad too much of a coincidence, and my knowledge of her legendary tactlessness affirmed my belief that she had volunteered herself to do the hatchet job required to kill my case. Immediately the case was assigned to our court, I called my former boss, Mr. Mike Bayowa, and I complained strenuously about the audacity of justice. Oyeko Abdullahi assuming jurisdiction in a case that asked me as a named party. I mailed the idea of writing a letter to demand that she withdrew from the case, but decided against this, as I felt that it would be seen as an attempt by me to scandalize her for no reason. I even had it pointed out that she was merely the pretrial judge. I knew I was right to be paranoid about her, and I was proven prescient in my deductions by subsequent events. The case suffered several unnecessary delays at the instances of the court and the defendant. The climax was when Afe brought a preliminary objection to the suit. It was founded upon some nebulous claim to judicial privilege by the unschooled senior citizen. The legal incongruity of this defense was lost on the unlearned silk and his crop of corrupt wigs. But they always knew that they were working for the question to the answer. After the dilly-dallying was done, Oyeko Abdullahi heard the motion and the counter-argument, and thereafter adjourned the case sine die for a ruling on the PO to be delivered. Sine die means until further notice, like he adjourned the case until further notice. Several months rolled by, and the court's ruling was not forthcoming. I caused at least 2 letters to be written to the court's registrar, demanding to know when the court would be sitting to deliver his ruling. The letters remained unanswered till this day. We became aware of the court's ruling only because a counsel sent to the court to make inquiries was told by the registrar that the ruling had been delivered 9 months after the close of address, and without as much as an SMS notice to the counsel on the court's own record. I was happy and contented with her ruling. I am happy with her ruling because it helped me to make sense of seemingly disconnected strands of the Dele story that had hitherto made no sense until she inserted herself into the narrative. I have always hated bullies. T.A.O. Abdullahi is defined by her garrulous bellicosity. He is bereft of diplomacy, love